Some of you guys have been asking me questions about problems related to Chapter 7.3, Homework 7.3. There's a series of problems that start with S, and they're either S-7, S-8, S-9, 10, 11, 12. So 7 and 10 relate to the straight line method, 8 and 11 relate to units of production, 9 and 12 relate to double declining balance. So what I want to do is going to go through each one of these and talk about just using a consistent set of facts to show you what they're actually looking for in these situations. So the first one, so if we're just talking about a straight line method, so just kind of ignore this for right now. If I'm looking, before I actually fill anything in on these homeworks, I usually have to represent them in a way that makes sense to me first, before I start plugging in the numbers they want. So if I'm using the straight line method, they're telling me that the cost of the machine is $23,000. Now, as we do in the notes, subtract off residual value, which in this case is 0. So there's nothing to subtract. So the depreciable base, the amount I'm going to spread out over the life of the asset, is $23,000. So now the question is, what is my life that I'm going to divide by? Now, if I'm using straight line, we're going to be using years. So in this case, I'm going to take the number of years, 4 years in this case, as my divisor. So 4 years. And when I do that math, I come up with a depreciation expense per the life units. So in this case, it would be 23,000. So 5750. That's how much depreciation I would recognize per year. So in a straight line depreciation system, it's nice and neat. It's basically they're asking for annual depreciation expense. So go 5750. That's what I have there, there, and there. Now, I don't encourage you guys just to follow the prompts. Again, I have to ask myself, what's going on in this case? If I were to look at the T accounts, so the cost of the machine is $23,000. What's going on throughout those 4 years? Well, accumulated depreciation, the contra asset account, that's an account that just keeps building over time. So under straight line, yeah, we start off with 0. Then we plug in 5750. The debit would be to depreciation expense. So the balance in 2017 would be, in accumulated depreciation, would be 5750. Next year, we would do the same journal entry, credit accumulated depreciation, debit depreciation expense. Now my balance, if I were to take a balance, in this case, if I just did that and took a balance, I'm not going to do that right now. I'm just going to put it over here. Now the balance in this case is 11,500. And I keep doing that for each year, 5750. So this is for 2019. The new balance would be 17,250. And the final year, 5750, 23,000, which is the balance at the end of 2020. So I can just put it down here. 23,000 is how much I should see in accumulated depreciation. Does that make sense? Because at the end of the life, the net book value at the end of the useful life should equal the residual value. So does it in this case? Well, net book value equals cost minus the balance in accumulated depreciation. So 23,000 minus 23,000. That equals 0. What was my residual value? It was 0. So I know I'm doing it right. The thing about depreciation is it has a self-check feature to make sure you're doing things correctly. Okay, so if we go all the way through and project this, it indicates that I've done the allocation correctly. I've spread out 23,000 evenly over the 4 years. So now what are they asking up above? This is where I go back and say, okay, what does the problem need me to do? Okay, so they're asking me also for book value. Let me just check that really quick as well. I know the net book value, if I put a little column over here, net book value. Net book value is cost at any point in time minus the balance and accumulated depreciation. So let me just do this. Cost minus the current balance of accumulated depreciation, in that case, gets me what? Just 17,000. 250. Double check. Trust but verify. Okay. So that's my net book value at that point. Next year, do the same thing. 23,000 minus my net book value, minus my accumulated depreciation. Excuse me. 23 minus that happens to be 11,500. Do the same thing again the next year. Net book value must be 5750. And then the final year, we don't really need to do the math, but 23,000 minus 23,000, that net book value is 0. So for me, I draw this out. It's got to make sense. Then I go back and figure out, okay, what do you want me to plug in? All right. So in this case, accumulated depreciation balance over time. So for 2017, we started off with 0. We added 5750, so my balance is 5750. Then the next year, added another 5750, so 11,500. Add another 5750, 17,250. It's just another way to kind of do the math really quickly as well. 23,000. What's my net book value? Well, at the start, it was $23,000. Okay. There was no accumulated depreciation, right? So 23, now 23,000 minus the accumulated depreciation. My book value is now 17,250. And that's where this is coming from, by the way, is over here. So 17,250. Subtract off what's now the balance. It's the cost. Excuse me. Now it's cost minus 11,500. So that's 11,500. Now it's cost minus 17. So 5750. And it ends up at 0. That's straight line depreciation. Now let's take a look at the units of production method. Units of production follows kind of a similar pattern. So first, let's kind of go back up to the top here. Units of production doesn't divide by the life in years. So let's get rid of that. Units of production is going to divide by some amount that we can sort of clock or measure. They're saying in this case the total expected miles, that will be our units in this case, is 184. So I'm going to spread $23,000 of depreciable base, not over years, but over miles. So every mile that I drive results in how much depreciation? Well, this looks kind of weird. 0.125. So 12.5 cents per mile. Now that I know that, I can go through and say, well, okay, how much depreciation for 2017? So during 2017, let's see, it was 10,000 miles in 2017. So take this, multiply it by 10,000 equals 125. By the way, if you're ever multiplying with decimals or multiples of thousands, here's a little trick. Usually what you do is you add the number of zeros. So 1, 2, 3, 4. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. On the base number. But this is a decimal, so you can have to subtract off 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. So 1,250 is my number in this case. Just a little, or just use a calculator, whatever's easiest for you. I'm a geek. I like to do math. So 1,250 for the first year. The next one is times 65,000. This is 2018. That one's 8125. In 2019, our expense will be multiplied by how many? So 65,000. Excuse me. See, 38,000. So that's 3750. And times by 79,000. So in 2020, I'll have 9,875. Right, so these each of the years. So 2017, 2018, 2019, 2020. Oops. Okay, 2020. So similar to what we did with accumulated depreciation before, if I were to draw an accumulated depreciation account, I would basically be showing each year 1250 would be my credit, debit would be depreciation expense. 8125 for 2018, debit depreciation expense. 3750, 9875, there's no residual value, So imagine if we add up all those numbers, guess what we're going to get? $23,000. Okay. So what's the balance? Just going to keep a running total of the balance in this case. So 1250 is my accumulated depreciation balance. 93750. Excuse me, 9375. 13125. And this will be 23,000, which is just the same thing as the balance at the end of the year. So just keeping a running total of the balance in a quick sort of shortcut way. Given that these are my balances, what's the net book value each year that goes by? Well, I'm basically taking the 23,000. That's the cost. I'm subtracting off the balance in accumulated depreciation. So in this case, the net book value is going to be, do the math on this one. Let's double check. No, didn't. 3,000 minus 1250, 21750. Subtract off another 8125, 13,625. Subtract off another 375, 9875. Oh, look at that, 9875. And subtract off another 9875. It's going to be 0. Perfect. So again, sketching it out in a way that makes sense to me, I can see that, all right, it looks like I've caught everything. I'm allocating correctly based on this. What is the question now asking me? Okay. So again, they're asking me for depreciation expense and accumulated depreciation balances, etc. So let me just kind of scribble this out. Get rid of that. Go away. And then I begin plugging in. Depreciation expense, 1250, 8125, 3750, 9875. Accumulated depreciation, right? That's the T account over here, right? Started off at 0. Book value was 23,000 at that time. And I go through, add 1250, 9375, 13125, and then finally 23,000. So my net book value is going to be 0. And so just going to go through the same process we did before with straight line. Just update the book value. Take cost, subtract off whatever the balances are and accumulate depreciation, and that's what's going to get your book value. 23,000 minus 23,000 at the end of the life is 0. That's how you do the units of production. Now, in order to do double declining balance, I'm going to need a new clean sheet here. So paste the facts again, and let's jump into this. Now remember, double declining balance relies on the use of a chart to help us figure out what's going on. So I like to set up, because I've been practicing this a bit, I like to set up my facts as follows. This is their chart, I have my own chart. Recall from class where I said beginning net book value. Okay. Beginning net book value, which in our case was just the cost, 23,000 minus accumulated depreciation of 0. So at the beginning of 2017, net book value is just the 23,000. Okay. The double declining balance rate, DDB, deaf, dumb, and blind, percentage, is 2 times 1 over the life in years. So in this case, what does that mean? I take 2 times 1 over a life of 4 years, which is 2 over 4, which equals 50%. 1/2. Nice. 50%. That's going to be the same each year, so I can just going to plug that in all the way down. Just going to like flesh out my chart here. Some nice little lines, pretty little trees. Okay, so in the first year, depreciation expense is going to be how much? 23 times 50% is 11,500. It's my depreciation expense. I can, if you want to, you can just plug it in as you go. 11,500 is that year's depreciation. Now, what's my ending net book value? Well, it's the cost, 23,000, cost minus accumulated depreciation. What's accumulated depreciation after 1 year? Well, just going to put something over the side here. 11,500, that's what's going to be. Debit depreciation expense, 11,500. Credit accumulated depreciation, 11,500. So cost, so 23 minus that balance is what? This is nice because my percentage is half. It just so happens to be very nice and clean as I go through this, but it's not always going to be the case. So just do the math every single time. Cost minus the accumulated depreciation balance, 11,500. In fact, let's just do this. Balance, 11,500. Net book value, 11,500. It's a weird example. Okay. Now, like I said before in class, I recommend going down to the final year. So 2018, 2019, 2020. And plugging in ending net book value, which is my residual value. In this case, it should be 0. So I'm going to plug in 0 down there. And again, the reason why is because there's no way we can just do the 50% multiplication and actually get to 0. And the reason why is because the convex function of double declining balance is asymptotic, meaning that it will never quite ever reach 0. It will always just keep getting thinner, 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 but never reach 0. So that's why the last year we just kind of do a plug figure. So I'm going to go through just as I did in class and say my ending last year is this year's beginning. So I just plug in 11,500 as my beginning net book value, multiply it by 50%. That gets me 5,750. That's my depreciation expense in that year. So 5,750 is my credit to accumulated depreciation, debit depreciation expense. My updated balance now is, do the math in my head, 16. Is it 16,000? For crying out loud, where's my calculator? Trust but verify. 17. Goodness gracious. Yeah, that makes sense. So what's my new net book value now? This particular problem is not very challenging. This is way too coincidental. Too many numbers look the same, but that's because I have a 50% double declining balance, right? Anyways, so my new balance, 5,750. That's my ending book value. Here is going to be my beginning book value over here, 5,750. Oh, this is so much fun. Try to contain your excitement as you do these. It's half of 5,750. 2,875. When I do that, that's my journal entry. Debit depreciation expense 2,875. Credit accumulated depreciation 2,875. So what's that balance now? 20125. So this must be net book value 23,000 minus 20125. 2,875. Yeah. Interesting. 2,875 is my ending book value. So then I take that sucker and bring it over to the beginning. 2,875. And then I do what with it? Multiply by 50%. And that gets me, no, stop. Don't do that. This is where you stop and ignore that last little bit. In fact, when you're filling this out, I recommend just leaving that little 50% blank. Don't fall into that trap. It's so easy to do this. You want to rather calculate the difference. 2,875 is what I start. I end with 0. So how do I go from I have 2875 to I have nothing? The amount must be 2875. That's my plug. We call it plug figure. It's my algebra. It's my x variable. So 2875 is what I need to get a residual value of 0. So that brings my balance to, what does that add up all those guys? That should add up to 23,000. So 23,000 is my balance. Those are just the same. It's my ending balance there. So what's my book value? 23,000 cost minus 23,000 accumulated depreciation equals 0. So that's how I get to that sucker. Now I go through, I have to plug in all these silly little numbers here. All right, my expenses, 5750, 2875, and then another 2875. That was my plug. I'll put that in red. So remind you guys, 2875. Right? Book value is going to end up being 0 because there's 0 residual value. We start off with 23,000, and we just go through the motions. 0, zoom in this, 0 plus 11,500 is 11,500. Add another 5750 gets me 17,250. Add this 20, is it 21, 125? Yep. Gets me 23,000. And then you just go through and you just plug in it, plug in your book values. Again, this is why I like to have my own sort of notes off to the side. So 11,500, 5750, 2875. Boom. That's how I do it. So again, I recommend draw it out in a way that makes sense to you. If the notes make sense from class, then use that. Take the facts and sketch it out on scratch paper. Do that for all of your homework. If you haven't been doing that, I strongly recommend you start doing that, because if you get accustomed to this, how they present it in the problems, you're going to get pretty lost. The idea behind this is when you're doing these problems, it's got to make sense to you. If it doesn't, then you need to jump on Zoom so we can walk through it together. So let me know if you need any help with these.